They thought expelling a 9-year-old girl at midnight would be the end of it. They were catastrophically wrong. Picture this: a father sitting alone in the corner of a boardroom at 8:45 in the morning, silent, calm, waiting. The board members haven't arrived yet. They don't know he's there. They don't know what's coming. On the table in front of him sits a single USB drive, nothing else. No lawyer, no angry outburst, just that drive and 15 minutes that will change everything. But let me take you back. 12 hours earlier, 11:34 at night, Dominic Cross sat in the leather chair that had belonged to his late wife, the one she'd bought for her home office back when they still made plans for the future. His computer screen glowed in the darkness. A notification had just arrived through the Academy's parent portal. Not an email, a message stamped with official seals and legal disclaimers that filled the screen like armor around a devastating blow. Effective immediately, Violet Cross has been withdrawn from St. Augustine's Academy for Girls. This decision is final and not subject to appeal. 16 words. That's all it took to sever a 9-year-old from the only school she'd ever known. No explanation, no incident report, no phone call from a concerned administrator. Just 16 words delivered with the warmth of a coroner's report at 11:34 at night, when most parents would be too tired, too shocked, too defeated to do anything but accept it. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who thought you were powerless, that you'd just accept their decision and disappear quietly, that you didn't have the resources or the courage or the sheer determination to push back? If you have, then you know exactly what Dominic felt in that moment. That cold clarity that comes when you realize someone has made a catastrophic miscalculation about who you are and what you're willing to do. This father didn't scream, didn't punch a wall, didn't immediately call a lawyer or fire off an angry email. He just sat there and read that message 3 times, not scanning for meaning anymore. Meaning was clear. He was reading for structure, for rhythm, for the small tells that lived in the spaces between words. Because Dominic Cross had spent 23 years working in cybersecurity and digital forensics, he'd built his entire career on understanding how people hid things, how systems failed, and how the truth always left fingerprints if you knew where to look. And this message, this clinical, bureaucratic, delivered at midnight message, it was leaving fingerprints everywhere. Before I show you what he found, let me ask you something. If someone hurt your child, dismissed them, made them feel worthless without even giving them a chance to defend themselves, how far would you go to make it right? Drop a comment and tell me, because this story is about to show you what happens when a quiet man decides that enough is enough. And if you want more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed too far, hit that subscribe button right now, because what this father uncovered in the next 6 hours will absolutely leave you speechless. Let me tell you who Dominic Cross really was. Not just the facts, but the man underneath. 38 years old, living in a modest 2-bedroom house in the kind of neighborhood where people still left garage doors open on Saturday mornings and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. He drove a 6-year-old sedan, cooked the same 4 meals on rotation because cooking had never been his strength. Spent most evenings at a second-hand desk with 3 monitors doing contract work in systems engineering for companies that needed problems solved quietly and efficiently. From the outside, there was absolutely nothing remarkable about him, and that was exactly how he preferred it. But inside that house, in the spaces between the ordinary routines, there was a relationship that defined everything. Violet Cross, 9 years old, 4th grade, a girl who still carried her mother's childhood elephant in her backpack every single day. She had Isabella's eyes, deep brown and thoughtful. She had Dominic's stillness, that quality of watching and processing before speaking. And she had been at St. Augustine's Academy for 2 years without a single incident in her file. No behavior problems, no academic struggles, nothing that would explain why she'd been expelled in the middle of the night. Isabella had died 2 years ago. Cancer. The kind that moved fast and left no time for the goodbyes you needed. She'd been the warm one, the one who filled rooms with laughter and made friends effortlessly, and could talk to absolutely anyone. Dominic had been her opposite in almost every way. Quiet, where she was vibrant. Careful, where she was spontaneous. But they'd worked. They'd balanced. And when she died, he'd had to learn how to be both parents to a 7-year-old girl who'd just lost the center of her world. He'd done his best. Mornings were their ritual. He'd wake Violet at 7:15 with the same gentle knock on her door. She'd appear 10 minutes later, usually already dressed because she liked picking out her own clothes the night before. He'd make breakfast. She liked scrambled eggs with cheese melted through, slightly runny, and toast cut diagonally because horizontal cuts were wrong for reasons she'd never fully explained. They'd eat together at the kitchen table. He'd ask about her homework. She'd tell him about whatever book she was reading. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that build a life. But Dominic had noticed something over the past few months. Violet was lonely, not the dramatic kind of lonely that came with tears and begging to stay home from school. She was adapting to it, quietly, carefully. The way she adapted to most hard things, she'd simply accepted that she hadn't found her people yet. There was a particular group of girls in her class, the ones who moved through hallways like they'd already decided who belonged and who didn't. The Harrington girl was the center of that group. Pretty, confident, powerful in the way that fourth-grade girls can be when they've learned early that money and status open doors. Violet had tried to befriend them, tried to sit at their lunch table, tried to join their games at recess, and they'd tolerated her for a while before the tolerance turned to annoyance, and the annoyance turned to something colder. Dominic had seen it happening, had watched his daughter come home with slightly less light in her eyes each week, but he'd also seen her resilience, her quiet determination, her belief that if she just kept trying, kept being kind, eventually they'd see her. He'd been waiting, watching, ready to step in if it crossed a line, but trusting that sometimes kids needed to navigate their own social worlds. He'd chosen St. Augustine's carefully after Isabella died. Research, comparison, tours of 5 different schools. He'd liked their anti-bullying policy, liked their stated commitment to inclusive community, liked that they seemed to value character as much as achievement. It had felt like a place where Violet could heal, could grow, could find the kind of friendships that would sustain her. And now they'd expelled her, at midnight, with no explanation, no process, no humanity. He stood slowly from Isabella's chair and walked to Violet's room, third door on the left. The hand-painted nameplate she'd made in art class still hung slightly crooked because he kept forgetting to level it. He stood in the doorway and watched her sleep, curled on her side, one arm wrapped around the elephant, her nightlight throwing soft star-shaped shadows across the ceiling. She looked peaceful. Tomorrow morning, she'd wake up expecting the usual routine. Eggs and toast, backpack by the door, carpool arriving at 8. Tomorrow morning, he'd have to tell her that everything had changed, that the school she'd been trying so hard to belong to had decided she didn't belong at all, and he'd have to watch understanding break across her face like glass shattering in slow motion. But tonight, she could sleep. He returned to his study. The message was still glowing on his screen, still final, still cold. He opened a second window and began to read, not the glossy marketing materials he'd reviewed 2 years ago when they'd first enrolled Violet, the documents that lived in spaces most parents never thought to examine, board meeting minutes, budget reports, organizational charts showing who reported to whom, the digital infrastructure specifications that were publicly filed with the state education board. The first thing he noticed made him lean forward. The sender address carried the St. Augustine's domain, but the message hadn't been routed through the district's official communication platform. That platform generated a specific header signature on every outbound message, a digital watermark proving it had gone through proper channels. This message didn't have it. Someone had composed it directly from a server-side account, bypassing the standard system entirely. Why would someone do that? Only one reason: to avoid creating a record in the standard audit logs. He pulled up the full message headers. Technical people know that every email carries invisible information, routing data, timestamps, authentication protocols, the digital equivalent of fingerprints. This message had been created at 2:43 in the afternoon, but it hadn't been sent until 11:34 at night, 9 hours between creation and transmission. Someone had written this during school hours, had sat on it, had waited until most parents would be in bed, too shocked to respond immediately. That wasn't procedure, that was strategy. Dominic made coffee, the good kind Isabella had always insisted on, the kind that cost too much but tasted like someone actually cared about the beans. It was 1:17 in the morning now. He had time. He opened another window, and accessed the public Wi-Fi logs that St. Augustine's was required to maintain for network security compliance. Guest access, faculty access, administrative access. Every device that connected left a trail. MAC addresses, connection times, duration. At 2:38 in the afternoon yesterday, 5 minutes before the expulsion message was created, a personal device had connected to the Academy's guest network. Not a school-issued laptop, not an administrative terminal, someone's personal phone. He cross-referenced the device identifier. It had connected from the administrative building, second floor, where the board offices were located. He took a sip of coffee and kept digging. Email systems keep backups. Cloud storage. Redundancy. In case servers fail. Most people don't know that deleted emails aren't really deleted. They're archived, encrypted, stored in systems designed to protect institutions from data loss. Those systems also protect against institutional misconduct if you know how to access them properly. Dominic knew how to access them properly. It was 4:17 in the morning when he found the first thread. The email chain involved 4 people: Victoria Ashford, headmistress; Marcus Whitfield, board treasurer; Jennifer Marks, board secretary; and Catherine Yates, director of student affairs. The subject line read, "Final decision. Re the cross situation." The earliest message in the chain was dated 3 days ago, 3 days before Violet had been expelled. 3 days before Dominic had received any notification that there was a situation at all. The first message was from Catherine Yates. The Harrington family has filed a formal complaint regarding Violet Cross. They allege that Violet has been making their daughter uncomfortable by repeatedly attempting to force friendship despite being asked to stop. Mrs. Harrington is requesting that we address this immediately before it escalates further. Given the family's position, I recommend we handle this delicately. Dominic read that twice. Force friendship. His 9-year-old daughter, trying to sit at a lunch table, trying to be included in playground games. That was forcing friendship. The next message was from Marcus Whitfield. We need to consider the Harrington pledge to the capital campaign. $2.3 million is not something we can risk over a social conflict between students. If we can resolve this quietly, that would be preferable. $2.3 million. There it was. The real reason. Not policy, not student welfare. Money. Victoria Ashford's response came next. I agree we need to handle this carefully. However, our anti-bullying policy requires that we investigate complaints with input from all parties involved. If we expel the Cross girl without a hearing, we'll be in violation of our own stated procedures. Jennifer Marks had replied, could we frame it as an administrative withdrawal rather than disciplinary action? That way, it's not technically an expulsion and doesn't require the same process. We present it as a decision already made. Most parents don't push back when we use definitive language. Most parents don't push back. Dominic felt something very cold settle behind his ribs. They'd calculated this, counted on him being too intimidated or too overwhelmed or too trusting to question their authority. Victoria's final message, in the chain. Agreed. Catherine, draft the notification, send it after hours to minimize immediate response. Use the parent portal, not official email. Keep the language brief and final, no details that could invite argument. And there it was. The entire conspiracy laid out in their own words. A wealthy family complained. The school prioritized money over a child. They deliberately violated their own policies, and they'd coordinated the whole thing to avoid documentation and accountability. Dominic sat back in his chair. It was 6:30 in the morning now. The sun was starting to rise. Through his window, he could see the garden Isabella had planted. Roses growing wild because he didn't have her skill for pruning. She would have been furious about this. Not the cold, calculated fury he was feeling, the burning kind. The kind that would have had her at the school before dawn demanding answers. But Isabella wasn't here. He was. And fury wasn't going to fix this. Evidence would. He created a new folder on his desktop. Started pulling everything together. The expulsion message with full headers showing the metadata manipulation. The email chain proving deliberate policy violation. The network logs showing the use of personal devices to avoid official systems. The donor records proving the Harrington family's $2.3 million pledge. The Academy's own anti-bullying policy document with the sections they'd violated, highlighted. He encrypted it all, created 3 separate backup copies on different cloud services with time-stamped authentication, set up an automated distribution system that would release everything to a prepared list of recipients if he didn't check in every 12 hours. Journalists, education board members, every parent in the St. Augustine's directory, insurance against retaliation. Then he created one more file, a simple presentation, clean, professional, devastating, every piece of evidence organized in chronological order with clear labels and minimal commentary. He didn't need to editorialize. The facts spoke for themselves. He saved it all to a USB drive, one copy, the one he'd carry into that boardroom. At 7:15, Dominic went to wake Violet. He knocked gently on her door, the way he always did. She appeared 10 minutes later, already dressed in her St. Augustine's uniform. Navy jumper, white blouse, knee socks pulled up exactly even because she was particular about these things. She looked at his face. Something in her expression shifted. Kids know. They always know when something's wrong. She came into the kitchen and sat at the table. He made her eggs and toast. Cut the toast diagonally. She didn't touch it. "I'm not going to school today, am I?" Her voice was small, careful, testing the weight of words before fully speaking them. Dominic sat across from her. "No, sweetheart, not today. Did I?" She stopped, started again. Did I mess up something? And there it was, the question that would stay with him forever. His 9-year-old daughter's first instinct when facing punishment was to assume she'd done something wrong, to turn the blame inward, to accept that she was the problem. He knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. "You didn't mess up anything. Not one single thing. Some adults made a very bad decision, and I'm going to fix it." How? Such a simple question, delivered with such complete faith. She believed absolutely that he could fix this, that he would fix this, that her father could make the world right again. By showing them something they didn't expect to see, he said, "Do you trust me?" She nodded immediately. No hesitation. "Okay then. You're going to stay with Mrs. Chen next door today. I have a meeting to attend." What kind of meeting? He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that held no warmth at all. The kind where people learn that mistakes have consequences. 20 minutes later, Violet was safely at Mrs. Chen's house, helping arrange flowers in a vase because Mrs. Chen understood that children needed gentle activities when their worlds were tilting. Dominic drove to St. Augustine's Academy in his 6-year-old sedan, USB drive in his pocket, presentation loaded, evidence secured. The board met every third Tuesday at 9 in the founder's room. Dark wood paneling, portraits of severe-looking women who'd established the school in 1887, a space designed to intimidate, to remind parents that this institution had history, had weight, had authority that superseded any individual complaint. Dominic arrived at 8:45. The administrative assistant tried to stop him. "Sir, the board meeting is closed to parents." He'd smiled politely. "I understand. I'll just wait in the conference room." She'd hesitated. He'd walked past her before she could object. Confident movement, suggesting he had every right to be there. The founder's room was empty. He chose a chair in the corner, not at the head of the table where it would seem aggressive, not by the door where it would seem uncertain. The corner, where he could see everyone and they'd have to turn to see him, where he could observe their reactions. He placed the USB drive on the table, centered it carefully. Then he sat back and waited. If you're loving this story, hit that like button right now and stay with me, because what happens when that board walks in and sees him sitting there is absolutely perfect. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of what comes next. At 8:58, the first board member arrived, Marcus Whitfield, 62 years old. Expensive suit, the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He saw Dominic and stopped. "I'm sorry, but this is a closed meeting." Dominic didn't stand. "I know. I won't take much of your time." Victoria Ashford arrived next, 55, impeccably dressed, 23 years as headmistress. She saw Dominic, and her expression went carefully neutral. "Mr. Cross, this is highly irregular. If you'd like to schedule an appointment." "I sent an email requesting a meeting yesterday," Dominic said calmly. "I didn't receive a response, so I decided to come in person." The other board members filtered in. Jennifer Marks, Catherine Yates, 3 others whose names Dominic had memorized from the organizational charts. They all saw him. All exchanged glances ranging from confused to uncomfortable, to something that might have been guilt if anyone had been willing to name it. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table. Mr. Cross, I understand you're upset about the decision regarding Violet, but as the notification stated, it's final and not subject to appeal. We have procedures. Yes, procedures. Dominic leaned forward slightly. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. There's nothing to discuss. Jennifer Marks. This time, crisp, dismissive. The decision has been made. Made by whom? Dominic asked. Based on what investigation? Following which policies? Silence. Because I've been reviewing your policies, Dominic continued. His voice was still quiet, still calm, and I found some interesting discrepancies between what you claimed to do and what you actually did. He stood slowly, walked to the laptop connected to the room's presentation screen. May I? It wasn't really a question. Victoria started to object, but Marcus put a hand on her arm. Let him speak. Let's see where this goes. Dominic inserted the USB drive, pulled up the first file. The expulsion message filled the screen, except now, it wasn't just the message. It was the full technical breakdown. Headers exposed, metadata visible, routing information displayed like anatomy beneath skin. This message was sent to me at 11:34 last night, Dominic said. According to the timestamp, it originated from within the Academy's administrative network. However, he advanced to the next slide. The message wasn't sent through your official communication system. Someone bypassed it entirely, which is interesting because your official system generates audit logs, logs that can be reviewed, logs that create accountability. He let that hang in the air. The message was also created at 2:43 in the afternoon yesterday, but it wasn't sent until 9 hours later. Someone wrote this during school hours and then waited until most parents would be in bed to send it. That's not procedure. That's strategy. Catherine Yates shifted in her seat. Mr. Cross, with all due respect, we don't need a technical lecture. Dominic turned to look at her directly. You need exactly this, Ms. Yates, because someone on this board made several critical errors, and I'm going to walk you through each one so we're all very clear about what happened. Next slide. The network access logs appeared. Rows of data. Connection times. Device identifiers. The person who created that expulsion message used a personal device connected to your guest Wi-Fi, not a secure administrative terminal. Guest Wi-Fi access logs are backed up to cloud storage every 4 hours. Those logs are still there, and they show exactly who was in the administrative building, on the 2nd floor, at the exact time that message was drafted. He highlighted one row, the MAC address, the timestamp, the location. Marcus Whitfield had gone very pale, but the really interesting discovery, Dominic continued, came when I accessed the Academy's email archives. You see, cloud backup systems are designed to prevent data loss. They're very good at their job. Even when people think they've deleted something, it's still there. Next slide. The email chain appeared on the screen. Subject line, clearly visible. Final decision. Read the cross situation. The room went completely silent. These emails discuss my daughter's expulsion. They reference a complaint filed by the Harrington family. They talk about my daughter making their daughter uncomfortable by trying to force friendship. They discuss the need to handle this delicately, given the Harrington family's position, their position as major donors to your capital campaign. He pulled up the donor records. $2.3 million. Right there in black and white. These emails also show that you debated whether to follow your own anti-bullying policy, the policy that requires investigation with input from all parties, and you decided against it because, and I quote, he highlighted Jennifer Marks's message. Most parents don't push back when we use definitive language. Jennifer's face had gone from pale to red. So let me make sure I understand the situation correctly, Dominic said. His voice was still quiet, but now there was an edge underneath. A wealthy family complained that my 9-year-old daughter was trying to make friends with their daughter. You decided that $2.3 million was more important than following your own policies. You deliberately violated your anti-bullying procedures. You coordinated the entire process outside official channels to avoid documentation And you sent the expulsion notice at midnight, hoping I'd be too shocked or too intimidated to question it. He closed the laptop and turned to face them directly. That was a significant miscalculation, Mr. Cross. Victoria's voice was strained now, the confidence completely gone. I assure you that any irregularities in process were unintentional. No. The word cut through her explanation like a blade. Nothing about this was unintentional. This was calculated. You expelled a 9-year-old girl because a wealthy family found her loneliness inconvenient. You did it in the middle of the night, without warning, without investigation, because you thought you could, because you thought I wouldn't fight back. He picked up the USB drive, held it up so they could all see it. Here's what happens next. You have until 5 o'clock today to reinstate my daughter with a full written apology and a guarantee that the Harrington complaint will be investigated according to your own stated policies. If that doesn't happen, I will deliver this evidence to every member of the Parent Association, every local news outlet that covers education, and the state board that oversees private school accreditation. But you can't. Marcus started. You'll what? Dominic interrupted. Sue me for exposing the truth. Claim I hacked your systems. He smiled coldly. Everything I accessed was either sent to me directly or available through public records requests and legal discovery. I didn't break a single law. You did. You violated your own policies. You discriminated against a child to protect donor money. You coordinated a conspiracy to avoid accountability. All of that is documented right here. He placed the USB drive on the table, right in front of Victoria. That's a copy, he said. I have the original stored in 3 separate locations, encrypted, time-stamped. If anything happens to me, to my daughter, or if I detect any retaliation of any kind, those files release automatically to a distribution list I've already prepared. Journalists, lawyers, every parent whose email I could find in your public directories, the State Education Board, the Better Business Bureau, every private school accreditation agency in the country. The weight of what he'd built settled over the room like snow. The careful documentation, the redundant backups, the automated fail-safes, the sheer, meticulous preparation. You have until 5 o'clock, Dominic repeated quietly. After that, everyone gets to see how St. Augustine's Academy really makes its decisions. He walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. One more thing. My daughter cried herself to sleep last night. She asked me this morning if she'd done something wrong. She's 9 years old. She tried to make friends, and you punished her for it because someone with money found it annoying. He looked at each board member in turn. When you're deliberating today, I want you to think about that. I want you to imagine explaining to your own children why that was the right thing to do. I want you to carry that conversation in your head while you decide whether $2.3 million was worth what you did to a little girl who just wanted to belong. The door closed behind him with a soft click. For a very long time, no one in the founder's room moved. Then Victoria Ashford, headmistress of St. Augustine's Academy for Girls, guardian of tradition and standards and excellence, put her head in her hands. "What have we done?" she whispered. "You're watching a father dismantle an entire institution with nothing but truth and preparation. If this story is keeping you hooked, drop a comment right now and tell me, would you fight back like this if it was your child? And make sure you're subscribed, because we're not done yet. What happens next will show you that sometimes the quietest victories are the most powerful. Dominic sat in his car in the St. Augustine's parking lot for 10 minutes before starting the engine. His hands were shaking, not from fear, not from anger, from the sheer adrenaline of having done what he'd spent all night preparing to do. He'd faced them, shown them the evidence, delivered the ultimatum, and he'd done it without losing control, without giving them anything they could use against him. Professional, calm, devastating. But now the question was whether it would work. He drove to Mrs. Chen's house. Violet was on the back porch, still arranging flowers. She was meticulous about it. Each stem cut to the exact right length, each color placed to complement the others. She had Isabella's eye for beauty, for the small details that transformed something ordinary into something worth noticing. She saw him coming up the walk and set down the scissors. How was the meeting? Productive. What does that mean? He sat beside her on the porch steps. It means the grown-ups are going to fix their mistake. So I can go back to school. If you want to, but if you don't, if you'd rather try somewhere new, that's okay too. This is your choice. She thought about that for several steps as they walked back across the lawn toward home. Will the kids who didn't like me? She hesitated. Will they be nicer? And there it was, the question that all his preparation, all his evidence, all his careful documentation couldn't actually answer. He could force the academy to admit its error. He could expose the corruption and cowardice that had led to her expulsion. But he couldn't make 9-year-old girls kinder, couldn't legislate friendship or mandate belonging. Some things, he was learning, were beyond even the most determined father's ability to fix. I don't know, he said honestly. People change sometimes. Sometimes they don't. But here's what I do know. You deserve to be in a place where people see how extraordinary you are. And if St. Augustine's isn't that place, we'll find one that is. Violet slipped her small hand into his. Mom would have fought for me too, wouldn't she? The question landed like a blow, unexpected, perfectly aimed at the softest part of him. He stopped walking, knelt down so they were eye level. Your mother would have burned that entire school to the ground and salted the earth, he said. Violet giggled despite herself. But she also would have told you that you are kind and brave and worthy of friends who appreciate those things. She would have said that anyone who doesn't see that is missing out. Do you believe that? Every single day, they went inside. Dominic made lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup. Comfort food for a day that had required comfort. They ate together at the kitchen table. Violet told him about the flowers she'd arranged, about a book Mrs. Chen had given her, about whether she thought the garden needed new roses this spring, or if they should let the wild ones keep growing. Normal conversation, ordinary moments, the kind that reminded him why he'd walked into that boardroom in the first place. At 4 o'clock, he started watching his email. 4:15, 4:30, 4:45. Each minute stretched longer than the last. What if they called his bluff? What if they decided their reputation could survive the exposure? What if he'd miscalculated, and now he'd have to follow through on releasing everything and watching it all explode publicly? At 4:47, the notification appeared. New message from Victoria Ashford. Official Academy account this time. Routed through proper channels, copied to every board member and the Academy's legal counsel. He opened it. Dear Mr. Cross, after thorough review, the board has determined that the decision regarding Violet's enrollment was made in error and without adherence to proper investigative procedures. Effective immediately, Violet's status as a student in good standing at St. Augustine's Academy is reinstated. A formal apology will be issued to your family, and all parties involved in the initial complaint will be subject to the full scope of our anti-bullying investigation protocols. We have also initiated a comprehensive review of our internal communication and decision-making processes to ensure this type of procedural failure does not occur again. We deeply regret any distress this situation has caused to Violet and your family. It was corporate, careful, completely inadequate, but it was also surrender. Dominic read it twice. Then he walked to Violet's room where she was reading on her bed, the elephant tucked under one arm. He showed her the email on his phone. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly over the bigger words. What does reinstated mean? It means they're saying they were wrong. It means you can go back if you want to. Do I have to decide right now? No, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. She went back to her book. He returned to his study, sat in Isabella's chair, looked at the email again. He'd won, completely. They'd given him everything he'd demanded. Reinstatement, apology, investigation, process review, everything. So why did he feel so hollow? Because winning wasn't the same as healing. Because justice wasn't the same as belonging. Because he could force the academy to admit their mistake, but he couldn't force Violet's classmates to see her differently. Couldn't undo the rejection she'd experienced. Couldn't give her back the innocence of believing that institutions were fair and adults were trustworthy. Some damage couldn't be undocumented. That night at dinner, scrambled eggs because Violet had requested breakfast for dinner. She brought it up again. I think I want to go back, she said quietly, just to show them that they didn't break me. Dominic looked at his daughter across the table, 9 years old, still carrying her mother's elephant, still particular about how her toast was cut. But something in her eyes had changed. Something had hardened in a way that made her look much older, made her look like someone who'd learned too early that the world wasn't always fair. but you could choose not to let that destroy you. Then that's what we'll do, he said. The following Monday, Dominic walked Violet to the front entrance of St. Augustine's Academy. Other parents stared. Some had heard fragments of what happened through the relentless gossip networks that powered private school communities. Others were just curious about why the headmistress herself was standing at the entrance, waiting. Victoria Ashford's smile was strained, but appeared genuine. "Welcome back, Violet. We're very glad to have you." Violet, 9 years old and already learning the language of gracious vengeance, smiled politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford." Dominic watched his daughter walk through those doors, watched her disappear into the hallway toward her classroom. Every instinct screamed at him to follow, to monitor, to protect, but he couldn't protect her from everything. Some battles she needed to fight herself. He went to work, tried to focus on code and system architecture. Failed completely. At 3:30, he was waiting in the pickup line, scanning the crowd of students for Violet's face. She appeared with another girl, someone Dominic didn't recognize. They were talking animatedly about something, both carrying art projects that looked like papier-mâché volcanoes. Violet was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. She climbed into the car. "That's Maya," she said before he could ask. "She's new this year, too. Her family just moved here. She likes puzzles, and she's read every single book about sharks ever written, and she thinks diagonal toast is the only acceptable way." "How was your day?" Dominic asked. "Better than I thought. The Harrington girl wasn't there. I heard she transferred to a different school. And some of the other kids, they were nicer, like they felt bad about before. I don't know if they'll all be my friends, but Maya is, and that's enough for now. That's more than enough." Over the following weeks, the transformation continued. The Harrington family, facing a full investigation and the quiet scorn of other parents who'd learned what really happened, had indeed withdrawn their daughter and enrolled her elsewhere. Several board members resigned, citing other commitments but really fleeing the scandal. Victoria Ashford remained, but something fundamental had shifted. She moved through the halls differently now, less certainty, more awareness that her authority wasn't absolute. And Violet, who had been lonely, discovered that being the girl whose father had outmaneuvered the entire board carried unexpected social currency. Some kids approached her tentatively, testing whether she'd accept their friendship after they'd ignored her before. She was selective, gracious, but not desperate. She'd learned something valuable about the difference between being liked and being respected. Maya became her closest friend. They worked on projects together, had sleepovers, built the kind of friendship that didn't need to be forced because it grew naturally from genuine connection and shared interests. Dominic would hear them in Violet's room, laughing over inside jokes or debating which shark species was objectively the coolest. And something in his chest would loosen slightly. Other calls came in, parents from other schools who'd heard about what happened, lawyers wanting to discuss similar cases, a reporter asking if he'd go on record about private school accountability. He declined them all politely, but firmly. This had never been about exposure or revenge or making a broader point. It had been about his daughter. It had always only been about her. 3 months after the meeting in the founder's room, Dominic found Violet in the garden on a Saturday morning. She was sitting among Isabella's roses, which were blooming now in their wild, unpruned way. A book lay closed in her lap. She wasn't reading, just sitting, thinking, watching butterflies work through the flowers. He settled onto the bench Isabella had placed there years ago. "Good book. It's okay. Kind of sad, though. Want to talk about it." She closed the book, set it aside. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of what you did with the school?" He thought about Isabella, about her fierce protection of the people she loved, her absolute intolerance for injustice in any form, her belief that standing up mattered even when it was hard. "I think she would have been furious it was necessary in the first place," he said. "But yes, I think she'd be proud. I'm proud too." Violet's voice was quiet. "You made them see me." And there it was, the thing he'd been trying to give her all along. Not just reinstatement, or apologies or justice, though those mattered, but the simple, fundamental understanding that she was worth fighting for, worth seeing, worth defending against anyone who tried to diminish her. "You've always been worth seeing, sweetheart," he said. "I just made sure they couldn't pretend otherwise." She leaned against his shoulder. They sat together in the garden Isabella had planted, surrounded by roses that had grown wild and beautiful without anyone's permission, exactly as they were meant to. The butterflies moved through the blooms. The morning sun warmed the bench, and in that quiet moment, Dominic felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of something deeper, the knowledge that he'd done what needed to be done, that his daughter was healing, that love, in the end, was stronger than any institution's power. Violet's voice broke the silence. Maya wants to know if she can come over after school Monday. We're doing a project on ocean ecosystems. Of course. Can we make those cookies Mom used to make? The ones with the chocolate chips and the sea salt? We can try. I never got the recipe quite right. That's okay. They're still good, even when they're a little weird. He smiled. Just like people. She giggled. Yeah, just like people. If this story moved you, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's ever felt powerless against a system that seemed untouchable. And subscribe to this channel, because I bring you stories like this every single week. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed too far. Stories that will restore your faith that fighting for what's right still matters. Because here's what Dominic Cross proved that day in the boardroom. Institutions aren't infallible. Money doesn't make you untouchable. Documentation defeats corruption. And one person's courage, one father's refusal to accept injustice, can change an entire system. You are never as powerless as they want you to believe. The greatest victories aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're a 9-year-old girl sitting in a garden with her father, talking about cookies and ocean ecosystems, knowing absolutely that she's loved and protected and worth fighting for. Sometimes justice is quiet, but that doesn't make it any less complete. This is the story of a father who didn't raise his voice, who didn't make threats, who simply showed up with the truth and refused to back down. And in doing so, he taught his daughter the most important lesson of all. You fight for the people you love, always, without hesitation, no matter what. The garden, the roses, the butterflies working through wild blooms, a father and daughter sitting together in the sunlight, healing, growing, becoming exactly who they were always meant to be. That's the victory that matters most.